Hello, students of CDU. Today we're looking at how to write up your results section. This session is intended for HDR students, but I suppose it would be relevant to undergraduates as well. I pay respects to Larrakia elders, past, present, and emerging. And today we're going to look at an overview of the results section, talk about some of the language that we can use, talk about how to represent quantitative and qualitative results, how to represent visual data, and then I'll give you some advice and strategy and plug you into some useful tools in your writing. My name's Josh, and I'm a language and learning advisor here at CDU Library Casuarina, and this is just an advice session. Your supervisor should be your primary source of guidance. All the disciplines at CDU do things a little differently, so my tips can be overruled by their policies. It's on you to check the guidelines for your discipline or department. To begin with, if you'd like to scan that QR code and just type in what you think is the biggest challenge with writing a results section, that will be interesting for me because I can collect some data, but you can also see what other students have put into that. This is the full-time track milestones for a PhD at the university. In the first year, it's about setting up your project, getting it confirmed and cleared. Second year is about data collection and preliminary analysis. Third year is mostly about writing, and the fourth year is submitting, presenting, and final approval. So this will be most relevant to people who've already collected their data and have analyzed it and are starting to write it up. To begin, let's do a practice quiz. There are 4 multiple choice questions here about results. You can pause the video and think about your answers. Choose A, B, C for each of those. Okay, so if you've got your responses, a good results section summarizes the findings without trying to explain them. What shouldn't be included in the results section is any kind of interpretation. So results is purely just reporting the findings rather than digging into the reason for those findings. The data in the results section should be reported objectively and without bias. And you're most likely to be using tables and graphs to represent quantitative data, but not always. If your thesis is a traditional kind of monograph thesis, it'll look something like that. Now, like I said, every discipline's different. For example, in the engineering department, I've noticed that they combine their results and discussion chapters or sections. So yeah, there's some difference in the way that different disciplines do it, but it'll look something like that, I guess. And the results part is sandwiched right in the middle between the methodology and the discussion. It's likely that the results section won't be very long. So if you're doing a PhD, there's a max word limit of 100,000 words. It's possible your results section could be 5,000 words or less. An overview of the results section might look something like this. This is an example for mixed methods research. Start with an introduction and finish with a conclusion. So overview of the key findings in the beginning and then key takeaways in the end. Now, if you've got both quantitative and qualitative data, we usually do the quantitative first and start with the simple descriptive stats and move on to the inferential ones. And the qualitative will come after the quantitative, and it's usually organized by themes, but not always. So the results section is about what you found, not the reasons for those findings. Your job is just to report the data in an objective, factual way without any interpretation. The kind of language that we use in results is objective, neutral language. So we want to report without interpretation or speculation. So we use phrases like the results indicate that, the data show that, a total of X respondents reported that, etc. What we don't do is speculate with language like it seems that, it could mean, it appears that. We avoid conclusive terms like this proves that, or as a result of, or this shows that. We try not to use opinionated words. So these words that finish in ly, adverbs, there's usually some kind of emotion or opinion attached to those. So we try to avoid those. We don't use interpretive phrases, and we try not to exaggerate or use definitive sort of strong statements that could be disproven later. In terms of tense, when we're talking about the results themselves, we use the past tense. For example, the analysis revealed or participants reported. But when we're talking about visuals, we use the present tense. So past tense for a description of the results, but present tense for describing tables or visuals in our document. And in general, the kind of language that we use, we're avoiding causality. So we don't want to imply that something is caused by or has resulted in something else. We use language like was correlated with or associated with instead of suggesting a direct causality. We want to minimize the use of qualifiers like very, extremely, or quite. And where possible, we use hedging language to reflect uncertainty. For example, the results suggest that, or there's some evidence to support that. The Manchester Academic Phrase Bank is an awesome resource. Get to it by scanning that code or just typing that into Google. Depending on the part of your thesis that you're writing, in this blue bar along the top, you can find very useful language. So we're reporting our results. So you go there. Let's say we're reporting survey and interview results. Click on that, and it'll give you little chunks of useful language that you can sort of adapt to your needs. A little activity. Here are 2 excerpts from a results section. Have a read of them, pause the video, and decide which one is better and why. Okay, so if you chose the one on the left, good for you. The one on the right has several weaknesses. It does things like give opinions or evaluations. It uses causal language, so it implies that one thing is caused by another. It gives an evaluation or some kind of definitive statement about the data, which should be done later in the discussion. And it makes predictions, and things like that would belong in the discussion section. When we report quantitative results, like I said, we usually do those before we do our qualitative results if we're doing mixed methods. And there's a sequence for that. You start with an overview, cover the descriptive, easy stats, and then move forward into the inferential stats and the summary of your findings. We also, when reporting quantitative results, tend to use a lot of tables and graphs and charts because they're better for showing patterns and trends. Now, when we're using a graph or a chart or a table, we don't just throw it up there and expect that the reader will be able to understand it. We accompany it with text. They're just better for communicating a lot of information quickly. A picture tells 1,000 words kind of thing. When we're reporting qualitative results, the text will usually be the more dominant form of communication. There are a lot of reasons for displaying data visually. It's a very efficient way to communicate. It can be clearer. It engages the reader more. They're useful for showing comparisons between different groups or data sets, and people are likely to retain that information for longer, especially if they're visual learners. Tables are useful for communicating exact numerical values in a very efficient way, for summarizing key statistics, and for doing comparisons. So for example, this table is comparing values from group B and group A. And if I wanted to represent all of that in purely text form, it would take a hell of a lot of words and could be quite confusing. Tables, quick, efficient, and easy. We number them, we give them a title, and we usually accompany a table with a mention in the text above or below and some kind of summary of the key points. Graphs and charts are useful for showing trends, distributions, or comparisons, and each type of graph or chart has benefits for a certain kind of data set. If you're trying to represent nominal data, for example, like yes/no questions, bar charts are the best. If you're trying to represent ordinal data, like the responses to a Likert scale question, a stacked bar chart's good. If you're doing interval data, which are exact measurements, then line graphs or histograms. And if you're trying to represent ratios, then scatter plots or box plots are more appropriate. So yeah, bar charts are good for comparing groups or categories, histograms for showing distribution frequency, scatter plots for showing relationships between continuous variables, pie charts for whole proportions or whole percentages, and line graphs for trends over time. So here's 5 data sets. Here's 5 kinds of charts or graphs. Match them up. Which one do you think is most appropriate to represent these data sets? Pause the video, choose A, B, C, or D for each of those, and I'll see you in a second. Okay. If we want to show sales data over 1 year, line graph would be most appropriate for that. A simple percentage breakdown of survey responses, pie chart. If we want to look at the average test scores across different schools, that's a comparison. Bar charts are best for that. If we want to see the distribution of heights in a population, one of these bell-curved histograms would be appropriate. And the relationship between study hours and exam scores, some kind of scatter plot or box plot. So in this one, the person who spends more hours studying gets higher results on exams. Now, with qualitative data, you're more likely to be using text to represent your findings, but not always. We organize our data into groups or themes. So for example, if I dumped out this box of mismatched Lego and asked you to organize it, some people would sweep it into groups by color. Some people would sweep it into groups by the number of little knobs. And there's a lot of different ways to code and categorize these Lego. Let's take these 3 interview excerpts, for example. The research has gone and collected data about how people feel about working from home, go through and read every word of their transcript and code the relevant parts. And while they're doing that, they notice that some of those parts kind of match up or support other parts, so they can organize it into themes. And then once it's coded and themed, we're able to sort of organize it into groups and recognize those patterns more easily. So when we're presenting our qualitative results in text, we organize them into themed sections or paragraphs, and we represent our data with quotes. It's important that we remain objective when we're doing that and that we use representative quotes, not outliers. So a little activity, the interviewer has asked, can you tell me about your experience with remote work during the pandemic? And the participant's given a response. Read that and see if you can identify 3 themes with a quote to represent each theme. You can pause the video and unpause when you're done. Okay, so 3 possible themes that emerge from that data set are challenges, and a good quote to represent that would be this one. Another one would be the flexibility of remote work, represented by that. And another one would be the blurred boundaries between work life and home life. There are some conventions that we follow when we're using graphs or visuals. We always give it a figure number or a table number and some kind of unique title. If the graph or visual is not ours, then it needs to be cited, author, year, and page number. This is an APA 7. But if the data belongs to us and it's a result of our research, then we don't need that citation. It's good practice when we use a graph or a chart to introduce it in the text and to do some kind of interpretation of the key data in the graph. Now, if it's your data, there's no need for a citation, but if you are using someone else's graph or chart, then along with the citation, you'll need the full bibliographical reference at the end of your document. Now, I talk to a lot of lecturers about their students' writing, and these are the common mistakes that lecturers report to me. Firstly, students sometimes choose the wrong kind of visual. For example, they might use a pie chart to display trends over time when it's better to do that with some kind of line chart. Sometimes students forget to give it a figure number or a table number and a title. Sometimes they don't label the x-axis or the y-axis. Sometimes they try to put too much into the graph or the chart. Sometimes they forget to mention the chart in their text. And sometimes they forget to interpret or give an overview of the main trends in the chart in their text. And then there's issues with poor quality images or confusing color schemes. All right, this is a poor quality visual. I used ChatGPT to make it. Have a look at it and mentally critique it. What's wrong with this graph or chart and how would you improve it? Okay, there's so much wrong with it. It doesn't have a figure number or a title. The x-axis and the y-axis are either unlabeled or have confusing labels. There's way too much in it. The color scheme is weird. And yeah, if we were grading that chart, it'd be an absolute fail. I'll finish up with some general advice and strategy for writing your results section. The first thing is when you're organizing your results, trying to decide on the order that you'll present them. I think it's a good idea to follow the order of your research questions. So let's say in your introduction, you've come out with 3 research questions. It seems logical in your results section that you would report data in the order that those questions are asked. If you're organizing your qualitative results, for example, by theme, make sure that you label them in an appropriate way. For example, this researcher has organized their data by color, so make sure that your headings or subheadings represent that appropriately. And the next one is kind of common sense, but when you're reporting your results, start out with the most important, most significant key results, and then move down the scale in terms of importance. There's no need to report everything. You will provide a full set of your data in the appendices of your paper, but in your results section, just report the key findings. Start with the most relevant ones and ones that directly address your research question. And don't overinterpret the data or even interpret it at all. You can interpret it and speculate and discuss it in your discussions. The best bit of advice I can give you, though, is to read other people's results section. Since you're HDR students, I advise you to go to the CDU Bank of Student Theses to find a thesis that's similar in topic to yours and that's within the same discipline, and see how your discipline has done it. Anything that you find in that bank has passed, it's been approved, the candidate has been successful, they are now a holder of a PhD. So make note on how they've organized their results section, and the kind of language that they've used, and the kinds of visual images that they've used. If you want to do a wider search, you can find any Australian published thesis here. And if you want to do an even wider search, a global one there. In conclusion, I think you should be very selective about the way that you report your data. You don't have to include everything. I think you should maximize your use of visuals and try to remain objective in your language. Save the interpretation or the explanations for the next section. All in all, try to be clear and concise. A good results section is not necessarily a long results section. So as HDR students at CDU, there's lots of support available for you. If you haven't checked out the ORI calendar, the Research and Innovation Events calendar, please go and do that. The library has its own set of workshops running every day related to all kinds of academic skills and literacies. Have a shop around in there, see if there's something you might find useful. We have an extensive online self-access center that we call Study Skills. You can learn about all of the different assignment types. You can see model answers that are annotated and cover a whole range of study skills related to academic writing and oral presentations. We've got a section devoted specifically to research communication. This is more tailored to HDR students. You're also welcome to book an appointment with an HDR advisor. These are 60-minute appointments. You can have one a week, and they're for more general advice rather than discipline-specific stuff. If you have general questions, library staff monitor this email address constantly. You can make an inquiry about anything in there. And if you've got any feedback on this session, I'm always open to that. So I hope you got something useful from this session. I wish you the best of luck with your writing, and I hope to see you around campus. Peace. And